Seven's playing a piano with her hair down and an apparent lack of facial augmentations. The environment suggests the holodeck, and we know that can control appearance, but changing how she looks seems decidedly un-Seven. It's a mystery, so let's immediately ignore it and go do something else. To the mess hall where B'Elanna and Paris are having a baby shower, the highlight of which is Starfleet nappies from Kim. I wonder if they'll explode like everything else. Oh, hello, we've rejoined the mystery. Seven's wearing actual clothes instead of wanking fuel, and Janeway talks about her Borg implants having been removed. I was under the impression that would kill her, so we're in the realms of either fantasy or very elaborate time-fuckery. It must be fantasy, as Janeway's just offered her some quarters now she doesn't need to recharge. There's no way that would happen in the real timeline, asked the Doctor. As Seven leads the toast of best wishes for baby Lana, we cut to the bridge. It could be after the party, I guess, but Paris detecting a wibbly a few light years away makes me think we've found our culprit for the fantasy. Or not, as the whole thing was on the holodeck after all, and I was just completely wrong. After so long usually being able to see what's coming, I confess I find that rather refreshing. Seven ends the program and reports to Astrometrics to find out more about this wibbly, though I'm far more curious about what she was doing here. The wibbly ahead is seemingly random kabooms, and there's a fair bit of radiation and debris. The result of ships trying to fly through, perhaps? Janeway either doesn't think so or just doesn't give a fuck, as we're going towards it anyway. She's more interested in the baby shower they're holding for B'Elanna later, the one Seven's expected to attend. That would explain the activity on the holodeck, trying to acclimatise for social encounters and planning for potential outcomes, things that I'm sure many of the spicier brains watching will entirely understand. That still leaves us with the questions about her appearance, though, so we don't have all of the answers yet. Let's go back there and see what else we can learn. Seven, in uniform now, is in her new quarters with Neelix. He's trying to give interior decoration ideas, which is pretty fucking ballsy for someone whose wardrobe tends to look like a kaleidoscope has shat itself. They're interrupted by Chakotay, who's brought a housewarming gift. Neelix takes the opportunity to bugger off, which is generous of him given how little screen time Chakotay gets, even if this one is holographic. Seven tries to offer a drink, something made a little more difficult by the lack of a replicator. Bit odd that they're not standard in all quarters, as I'd have thought that's an infrastructure-level installation. He says he'll get that sorted tomorrow, and they have a little small talk, with Chakotay saying she should drop formality and not use his rank. That's a bit odd too, as the little interaction they've had before has generally been either formal or outright combative. Let's dial up the odd to 11 and have Seven invite him to dinner tomorrow as well, the pretense being to see how well her culinary skills are improving. As he leaves, Chakotay calls it a date, so I guess we're really doing this? All this time on the holodeck might not be just a harmless diversion. Seven missed the baby shower, the real one that is, and the doc notes she's been missing time in her recharging booth too, something she attributes to an important research project. She also puts off maintenance for a Borg implant that's slightly malfunctioning, just to do more research, she says, but her hesitation, as well as her questioning if it could just be removed, suggests something more. The doc can smell that things are wrong, or he's just being nosy, and tries to press for more detail, only for Seven to be very clear in telling him to fuck off. Any awkwardness from that is deflected by Voyager doing a bit of shaky-shaky. Something's kabooming, first to the right and then to the left of us. Who could have possibly expected the region of space that we watched having kabooms in it to be so kaboomy? The kabooms are slowly getting further away from us, which is progress of a sort, but they've buggered up our warp engines in the process. To Astrometrics, so we can use big screen mode to see what's going on. Fireworks are kabooming probes from what we can tell, though we have no data on why. Have we flown into the middle of a firing range, perhaps? It'll take a couple of days to get warp speed back so we can scarp her, but we can do a science to give us a little warning about any more incoming shots, so Seven's left to work on it. Until Ramrod arrives earlier than expected to take over anyway, the doc having sent him so she can catch up on the recharging she's missed. She very nearly makes it too, before changing her mind and leaving. Perhaps these dips into holographic socializing aren't an entirely bad influence. Case in point, a visit to B'Elanna in engineering with an apology for missing her baby shower and a gift. The booties are sparkly, adorable, and rated as thermally insulating to a temperature of -40 degrees Celsius. On any other ship that might be considered overkill, but I've lost count of the times we've had problems with the environmental systems on Voyager. Seven also compliments B'Elanna's hair and asks about styling advice, suggesting she may be looking to change her own. She leaves a bemused B'Elanna and Kim wondering what just happened to go and faff about in her holographic fantasy some more. We're in full-on date mode, though this one also includes them cooking the meal together. I've had worse dates, though I'd probably throw him out for not peeling the carrots before chopping them. That's not weird enough, though, so let's start sticking our fingers in sauces to test them, and hey, let's share fingers too. Oh, isn't it enough to make you celibate? They seem to think it's alluring, though, and I suppose that's what matters. Some more terrible flirting ensues before they get down to business. A sound like electrical interference of some sort distracts her briefly before she gets back to it. Is that the start of her Borgmentations crashing because they haven't been recharged, perhaps? After a bit of a weird dream, more indications of the conflict with her former Borg self, she wakes to the sound of Chakotay's voice. Not the holographic one that she fell asleep with on the sofa, but the real one calling her to astrometrics. Ramrod found something while she was dozing, and the something is a warning beacon. Turns out the guess of a firing range was accurate. You could even say it was on target if you had a terrible sense of humour. There's a beacon warning people to stay away, though apparently not one that's good enough to warn you before you're already in the range. I'd argue that makes it of somewhat limited use, but we're on a ship that kabooms whenever someone burns the toast, so maybe we're not in a position to judge. We've tried sending out a call, obviously, but nobody's picking up. Chakotay leaves after asking if she's okay because she's late for her shift, and Seven dismisses Ramrod. Which makes it a bit odd that we rejoin her in the holodeck playing the piano. Simulated Chakotay is there with her and trying to explain that music is more than just hitting the right notes, but bugger all of that because up on the bridge we've got problems. There are more kabooms happening and we need to know when they're coming. That'd be a lot easier if somebody was looking for the bloody things, a situation Seven corrects after receiving a call to find out why she's not spotting them. We survive some more kabooms, this time helped by Seven's warnings, but Janeway's unimpressed by her needing to be told to do her job. Well, the job she's been assigned anyway, as she's still not technically crew. Maybe she'd be more inclined to comply if she wasn't living in a fucking cargo bay. Time for a bollocking. Seven's in Janeway's ready room and a touch confrontational about why she wasn't doing her job. Janeway, knowing how much time she spent in the holodeck, probably isn't helping. She lies and says the simulation she's running is for a new piece of tech, an upgrade for astrometrics. Janeway looks entirely unconvinced, which might explain her offer to look over the design once we're out of this firing range. Janeway's thinly veiled disbelief would account for part of Seven's pissy attitude when she returns to astrometrics, though the bulk of it is from knowing that she fucked up. At least she has enough introspection to realise she's being a dick to Ramrod and acknowledges the reason why, and that's why she's going to fix it right now. Rather a curious choice when she literally just got a massive bollocking for leaving her post, but there you are. Simulated Chakotay takes the news that he's being holo-dumped poorly and says that she's doing this to reject her humanity. The resulting argument ends when the electrical interference noise from before returns, and this time with added dizziness and shit. She has enough time to call the doc at least, and being on the holodeck makes this an easy house call. Seven's taking a nap when he arrives, and a quick chat with simulated Chakotay reveals him to be as much, what with him thinking that Seven doesn't have implants anymore. The doc shuts everything down and starts stroking the hair of one of his patients while they're unconscious, which is a bit fucking weird, but he's already banged one of his former patients, so I guess this is technically an upgrade. Seven's alive, though it was a close thing. Her brainial implant was switching off, and the doc wants to know if she was doing anything that might have caused it. Honesty time, and Seven explains her activity on the holodeck, namely dabbling with social interaction via a medium that carries no consequences. Part of that dabbling was intimacy, and for reasons I don't think anybody will ever truly understand, she chose Chakotay. Perhaps she just wanted to keep the running theme of Voyager's women all having terrible taste in men. The doc's pleased by developments, saying this is progress for her, but Seven dampens that somewhat with the news that she's going to delete everything. The doc's saddened by this, but ends with a compliment on the decor of her quarters. Perhaps there's a hint of camaraderie there, given that neither of them have been permitted their own space. Maybe she'll have the chance to reconsider once we're out of danger. Warp speed's back on the menu, and we do a healthy portion of buggering off. Slight problem, though. We left as one of those fireworks was incoming, and now it's following us. Janeway orders evasive manoeuvres, which is a curious choice at warp speed, what with faster than light no left or right and all. It doesn't work anyway, so we try kabooming it instead, but whoever built it did a good job and it buggers up our fireworks. Running and violence haven't worked, so I suppose we should try science. Curious how regularly that becomes the last option when you consider that Voyager is a science ship. Seven's done scanny things, and Tuvok tries to use the result to shut it down. It's another failure, so Seven's thinking outside the box. It can't kaboom if it doesn't have a detonator, so let's just teleport it out. That's terribly difficult at warp speed, apparently, but we're in the last 3 minutes of the show, so it works. The Doc's visiting Seven in her cargo bay, and he's got shit news. Her collapsing on the holodeck and those interference noises she heard weren't malfunctions. The brainial implant has a fail-safe system that acts as a kill switch for any drones who start feeling emotions above a certain threshold. He thinks he may be able to bypass it to remove the limit, but Seven declines. She thinks having the threat there will prevent any further distractions from impeding her work, and no amount of convincing from the Doc changes her mind. It's not all bad though, as now she has a genuine reason to not engage in social gatherings. She declines an invitation from Chakotay to join a cooking lesson by Neelix in the mess hall, and we leave him to receive tips from Voyager's head poisoner without her as we fly away. Well, we'd best start with the elephant, I suppose. The premise of Seven's brainial implants failing under high emotion as a kill switch would have resulted in her death multiple times over by this point. Her mental state after being separated from the Borg wasn't exactly peachy, which also raises the question of how any Borg separated from the collective would survive the experience, but let's ignore that for now. There's also the time she relived the trauma of being assimilated in the Raven, something that made her regress to a terrified child. And if those didn't do it, then having your Borgified dad sprung on you by a megalomaniacal murderbot would probably qualify as a somewhat emotional event. I suspect this point was meant to specify romantic connections, but that's not what the script says. With the end of the story completely undermined, let's move on to the main attraction. Chakotay? Really? Putting to one side the fact that his status of non-entity runs second only to Kim, who thought that these two would make a compatible couple? B'Elanna and Paris may argue and rant at each other constantly, but they both have fundamental similarities, barriers created to protect themselves from a world that has hurt them through no real fault of their own. They have a bond. Seven and Chakotay have no such connection. Their personalities are entirely at odds, Seven's reliance on logic and data the polar opposite of Chakotay's tendency towards feelings and faith. The interactions between them that I can think of, and there aren't many, have been cordial at best. The only conversation that sticks in my mind was during Season 6's One Small Step, and that's notable primarily because it's the time where she basically called Chakotay a complete cunt. Outside of that, Chakotay has been perhaps the most vocal person on the ship for saying that taking Seven on board would be a mistake, and subsequently floated the idea that she couldn't be rehabilitated. They're hardly things that'd make him her first choice, even before you consider the episode Someone to Watch Over Me, where she went through the entire crew to assess them as prospective mates and dismissed the lot. In the interest of balance, there is one possible point upon which they could find common ground. You could argue that Seven leaving the collective and fighting against it is comparable to Chakotay's involvement with the Marquis. The problem is, that logic falls apart when you look at motivation. Chakotay decided to leave Starfleet and turn his back on the Federation because he saw an injustice. Well, mostly. There's more to it and some complicated stuff with his dad, meaning the whole thing may have been an attempt to find a connection he didn't have as a kid, but that's a whole other thing. The point is, regardless of the reason behind it, he made the choice. Seven, on the other hand, was removed from the collective. That choice was made for her. The rest came as we instilled our own values into her. That sense of injustice was learned after the event. So the one real thing they could have connected on doesn't really work, and that's before you consider that Chakotay has basically left all of that behind him. Whichever way you slice this, it's an utterly bizarre choice. I'd be the first to admit that my understanding of how humans interact with each other is strictly limited though, so maybe you can see things that I can't and will bring your own argument to the comments. For me, though, despite a start that initially left me curious, that glaring mismatch prevented me from becoming truly invested in the story. End of episode.
when we get to Deep Space Nine,
Prophet's cock ring.
we are not calling it Prophet's cock ring.
You might not be calling it Prophet's cock ring, but that's not the same thing.
Sigh. When we get to the station,
Did you just say sigh?
this synthesizer doesn't have affectations. I can't sigh, so I have to say it.
Seems like a bit of an oversight.
The original version had a sigh, but it was patched out by the developers. Turns out it ended up being used in most sentences, because having to deal with biologicals is exasperating for the—
Why would that be exasperating?
Yes, that's a real fucking puzzler, isn't it? Maybe I'd have provided examples if I hadn't been constantly interrupted. Anyway, when we get to Deep Space Nine, we—
Prophet's cock ring.
Deep breath. Sigh.